It was Greenbelt Festival, Friday morning, breakfast time. I was navigating the obstacle course of overlapping guy ropes and rogue tent pegs, shaking off that weird, dry, yet kind of greasy feel of Portaloo hand sanitizer, when I heard my name called from over there to my left. Andy! I racked my brain to consider what I might be being told off for. What did I leave in the toilet? Oh no, it's fine. It's Steve Lawson. Hey man, what a treat. So yeah, it was great to see him. We got right into it. Even at that early hour, we were talking about themes from his PhD, which he's recently finished. And I was like, we have to get you on the Gentle Rebel podcast to talk about this stuff because it's so fascinating. So that's what we did. Steve's approach to making music and developing a kind of creative practice in a sustainable, practical, thoughtful way has always drawn me into his writing ever since I first came across him. Probably, when was it? About 2009, maybe? And yeah, it's really great to see that he's sort of turned 25 or more years of making a living as an improvisational solo bass player, kind of turned all of that into this thesis that made his PhD. And it unpacks and scrutinizes the mechanics of his approach, the kind of practical lived experience of that approach through the years, and provides a lens really through which to see why some of the common assumptions and some of the, approaches that people are often encouraged to follow when making art and sharing art and selling art have kind of flaws in them in many ways, depending on the vision and the values that we carry as humans and as artists. You know, we've moved into an age where numbers and scaling are often the goal, the sort of unthinking goal in many cases, but at what cost? So I'd say, at the heart of this conversation is the question, what happens when we stop thinking about audience as consumers of work and start seeing them as really collaborators in the meaning making of the work itself, as part of the story that infuses a creative practice. And so Steve and I sort of pick apart, push back on the viral idea that Rick Rubin has made kind of famous over the past few years, that the audience comes last. What does that mean? And does it actually hold water in practice when considering how to make a sustainable, meaningful and relational life as an artist or a creative professional? So I hope this conversation encourages and inspires anyone in that kind of position. What if we can identify and create new options to help us do what we love to do without selling out to the dictates of trends and algorithms? And I hope it will give you a sense of hope in the possibilities that there are other alternatives that we can create for ourselves and use as we sort of look around us and take inspiration from other people modeling other ways of doing things, like Steve is and has been. And because we speak about things that everyone is likely to be familiar with, this is not just for those people who are making, sharing and selling art in whatever form that might be. It's also something that we can all think about with regards to the way that change pushes and is integrated into culture more generally, and how our relationship with consumption and participation has transformed over the past couple of decades, and what that means for us in terms of the meaning that we enjoy in everyday life and the sense of connection, and how that plays into maybe a sense of alienation and disconnection and loneliness as well. So this question is really important in the context of a polarized society, an increasingly lonely society where technology is rapidly reshaping the landscape, and the pressure of productivity and that endless can that we talk about is turning us all into machines. What if slowing down and reconnecting with what it means to be human at the heart of creativity is both possible if we let it be, and it's also desirable? There's a real appetite for this as well in so many of us. So how can this desire be turned into a practical reality in the small ways that we all kind of engage with people, artists, creators, and the world in general? So yes, enough of my yakking. Let's get into it.
We're about to witness the greatest miracle of the machine age.
The Gentle Rebel Podcast.
I'm so glad you could come. This is going to be such an exciting day. I hope you enjoy it. I think you will.
Yeah, I feel like this has been a long time coming, and I can't believe we've never done it before.
Yeah, I feel like I should be offended that we haven't done this before.
Yeah.
Like, I just feel like, what's wrong with me? But I think the timing is good.
Yeah, and it's so we bumped into each other at Greenbelt Festival, and it's like, last time we spoke was last Greenbelt, and you were in the middle of doing your PhD, or you were at the end of doing your PhD.
I was actually writing it at Greenbelt. I managed to, the organisers of Greenbelt, lovely people that they are, arranged for me to have a backstage room where I could sit. It was basically a table in the corner of a staff canteen, but where I could sit and work, because I was that close to the end and still had that much work to do. But I didn't want to miss Greenbelt, but I also couldn't take 4 days off from writing. So it was great, because I was like, at Greenbelt chatting to like Brian Eno and people like that, and David Dark, who's also quoted in there, and then running off to write down what they'd said.
Amazing.
See you in a bit, it was putting it straight in. So, it was kind of useful from a straight from the horse's mouth kind of point of view. But it was so being back this year and not having that to do was really nice.
And it was great hearing about your thesis, and I thought it is so fascinating. It'd be really great to just chat about it, hear what it is like that you have written, and use that as kind of for jump off points into, I'm sure, some other deviations as well.
It's a practice-led PhD, so there are two types of practice PhDs. Practice as research is kind of still a relatively new and kind of growing area. So rather than writing 80,000 words with a practice PhD, part of it is creative work. But a practice-based one, the contribution to knowledge, which is the essential part of any PhD, is kind of what have you actually done that nobody else has done. And in a practice-based PhD, that's the work itself. So you go, look, this is a thing I've made that sounds like nothing that anybody else has ever done, and that's the evidence of it. And then I'm going to write about how I got to that point, but basically the work is the thing. With a practice-led one, the practice is evidence of what you're doing, but the contribution to knowledge could be a theoretical model or a way of thinking about what you did, or an approach to practice that is evidenced in the work, but the work itself isn't the thing. And that's what mine is. So mine, the title theme of it is that it's a study towards a new model for subscriber audience involvement in improvised music. But what that means in practice is that it was a way of looking at the influential relationship between me and my audience that ended up as a subscriber audience, because it's about my subscribers on Bandcamp. But there's a history chapter in there that documents the fact that I've been working on this for 27 years. That actually the building of that audience and the curation of audience spaces, and finding both public and private audience spaces for me to learn from, began before even my first solo gig. That I was doing that at the point when I first started thinking about seeing myself as a solo artist, which was in the late 90s. So I was in my 20s and just discovered the internet, just kind of got online. And I joined a bass player discussion group called the Bottom Line, and immediately started trying to find like-minded people on there, but also to write in a way that was almost like a manifesto of what I intended to do. And even at the time, I was aware of the fact that this was something that if I was signed to a label and I was trying to market a record, I would have finished the record before I got to talk to anybody about it. And the way that I would get to talk about it is, it would have to be like magazine worthy or radio worthy. That was that there was media mediation. There were media companies in between. But here I was, kind of on this mailing list, just chatting to people who might like what I did, and getting immediate response from those people, rather than from someone sat in the middle going, I can make money out of telling this story, I can sell advertisement against this interview. It was just a space for talking about things. So that meritocratic idea that, you know, that your words had value because of what they meant to the community rather than how someone else could make money out of them was part of it. But also just this idea that I could go, this is what I'm intending to do. So that when people heard the music, they came to it with this, with having heard my rationale for why I was doing it. Because I think all music kind of sits in that space. I mean, I remember I've had some weird criticism over the years where people have said, oh, this is no good because you didn't. I love, one of my favorites was a guy saying, I wasn't fully exploiting the potential of the bass guitar. I was like, does Bob Dylan fully exploit the potential of the acoustic guitar or the harmonica? Like, why is this sort of weird technical focus part of how and why someone should make music? Like, and so I was like, I'm okay missing what that guy thinks I should be doing because it's not part of my rationale for doing it. And so that creating spaces in which I could present that rationale and then make work in response to it, but also listen to how other people understood it. Because really early on, I would get responses from people and they would say, oh, that reminds me of such and such. I'd be like, wow, really? God, I hadn't even thought about that. And I would suddenly notice that it was an influence, or they would tell me that what they'd done with it, and when somebody chooses to give birth to your music or get married to your music, or, I remember getting an email in the mid noughties, and it just said your music was the subject line, and it's underneath, it said, my dad just died and all I can listen to is you. And it wasn't signed. There was no kind of contact details to get. There was just this email and the email address. So what I did was I took the first half of the email address because it was a Gmail address and it looked like a username. I can't remember what it was. And I put it into Google. And one of the top hits that came up was a Last FM profile, which, for those that are kind of too young for this, it still exists, but it was a social network that was built around tracking everything you listen to on your computer. And so this guy's Last FM profile came up. And indeed, he'd just been listening to me for weeks. And I was like, wow, what a thing to be told. What a thing. And then what a thing to have corroborated by the internet in its all its serendipitous glory. And I was just, and so I just emailed him back and said, I'm so sorry you're going through that. And I'm humbled that I get to be a part of that. But as an artist, like, that felt so much more important than having someone who had no idea what I was doing, reviewing it within a pile of CDs and saying, this is good in relation to other things. It's like, no, I want to know what it's like in relation to your life. I want to know what this music means to you. And creating audience spaces where I could do that was really important to me from the get-go. And so as that transitioned through from email lists to, I started a forum on my own website where people could come and have a conversation, like a kind of, PHP, BB, kind of classic web forum. I was involved in other ones, but I had this as the sort of the hub of where people were coming to. And then when social media blew up, I kind of moved it all onto Twitter. And was like, this is let's have this as a big public conversation. Let's all chat, but people can get to know each other. It felt quite egalitarian in that way. But obviously that blew up in 2012 and with the advent of algorithms. And so at that point, it's funny, I only discovered this again. This is one of the joys of doing a PhD, is you get to investigate your own history in a much more accurate way than you remember. And I found that I actually wrote a thing on my blog about saying, oh God, I wish I had an annual subscription. I wish I could do that. That would be the perfect idea for me. And off the back of that and a mutual friend, I got talking to the CEO of Bandcamp, a guy called Ethan Diamond, the founder. And he started asking, what I wanted, what I liked about Bandcamp, how I was using it. It was basically kind of, on one level it was market research, but it was also one where he was saying, tell me what you would like it to be. And one of the big conversations we had was about subscription platforms and what I would need from it and what I would want to be able to do. And so in 2014, I think, they launched the subscription, and I think 4 of us got to try it before anybody else. It was me, Candy Says, Lowercase Noises, I think it was one of the other guys, and then somebody else. Maybe did Zoe Keating do it? I don't know. Anyway, there's somebody else. There were 4 artists out of the 250,000 artists on Bandcamp. We got to try it for a year. I got to kind of properly road test it and then say to them, okay, this is what worked, this is what didn't, and then they launched the public version. But that was off the back of this, and suddenly I had a community space, which in some ways was not as good as a forum, because it's not a forum. It's posts to your mailing list with a space to comment. Like, it's not a discussion space in the way that I would like it to be. So it's not perfect, but it was a private space, and I think that's key. It was a space where only those comments from subscribers were visible to other subscribers. And it was a place where I could post video, but it was also, and this is the key bit for me, was where I could integrate that community with the economic rationale for what I was doing. So that all of a sudden, they, in order to be part of that community, were paying initially 20, then 25, now £30 a year. And although the ones who were in it from the beginning are still paying 20 because of the way the bank app works. But all of a sudden, like those people were not just emotionally and spiritually sustaining the music; they were financially the key. The overwhelming majority of the money that I made from recorded music still comes from that Bandcamp subscription. So it was like it felt like it was like the high point of bringing all of that together. And it was a non-algorithmically defined space. There was nothing that was sorting through what was going on in there. I was just making music. I wasn't having to market most of the music because I make so much music. Like I think the most I've released in a year was about 14 albums, but it fluctuates between 10 and 12 most of the time. I think last year was a bit lower because I was finishing the PhD. But yeah, so I quite often will kind of put out an awful lot of music. So I couldn't do a public marketing campaign. I mean, you know what it's like trying to release music and put it out. And I couldn't have done that in that with all of that music. But what I then had was an audience that had already paid for it. And I didn't have to rationalize the music. So that whole thing about providing a rationale for it that I'd done online for so long and kind of saying, this is what I'm intending to do. That was now an ongoing discussion about purpose and meaning. And it was two-way. So these people who had literally over 100 records by me, obviously not all my subscribers have listened to all of them, but some of them have listened to it, and know it better than I do, could talk about the catalogue and they could talk about it in this way. And so within the PhD, I come up with this model of like there's a couple of theoretical things that come into this. So what the Brian Eno component is that Brian has this concept of what he calls Scenius, which is the genius of a scene or a collective. He says that genius is not an individual trait. It's actually the manifestation of the collective intelligence of a scene. And so he uses the example of Russian painters in the early 20th century and how there were all these people who were doing interesting stuff in that scene. But the famous ones weren't the only ones. There were other people who were developing new ideas. And so for me, it was like, well, actually, I get to do what I do because I'm learning from my audience all the time and I understand it through them. And I'm given the permission to do what I do through them because I wouldn't be able to do it if it was solely a commercial proposition. I had to make each record and market it and put it out for radio. There's a bunch of my shit that I couldn't possibly get on radio. And it wouldn't work on streaming platforms either. Because streaming would demand from me that I make music for sleeping to, or music for relaxation, or music for whatever. And what I do is kind of a bit spiky for that. So I didn't want to start making what was basically badly paid library music for Spotify. So Scenius was one of the ideas. The other one was a theory that comes from, Umberto Eco, I think, originally came up with the term, but it was developed by a Birmingham scholar based in Birmingham called Stuart Hall, who's a Marxist theorist in the 70s. And he talked about what he called the reception cycle, which was that in mass media, a company or a TV production studio would make a show and encode it with meaning, and it would be decoded by the audience. And sometimes that process went wrong, and they didn't get what you were talking about. But then you would make more work based on that. And so the cycle was that you would sort of see how things were received and then go, okay, well, we kind of missed that. Let's dumb down the language, or let's do this or that. But it was very much a kind of binary thing where you encode it with meaning and they decode it. And I was like, well, no, it's not just me who's encoding my work with meaning, because obviously instrumental music, you can't get the meaning wrong. Like it's not like there's a thing where no, you didn't understand that was about a sunset, not a sunrise. How dare you? It doesn't work like that. But the sense of what it meant was cumulative. So when somebody did say, I played this when I got married, or that reminded me of such and such, and especially having been through COVID and then cancer, which maybe we'll get into a bit further on, like having been through those two things and soundtracking them, and the audience the audience being grateful for having some music that felt like it was theirs. Like this was music about now for them. That response was like it just helped me make sense of everything that was going on. So there's just this really healthy relationship. But they were constantly encoding it alongside me, and we were all decoding it and re-decoding it in new ways, based on new work, based on new observations. So it's this kind of like washing machine effect of kind of things tumbling around. And so I then used a concept from a Greenbelt speaker called David Dark, who talks about what he calls the space of the talkaboutable, which is a beautiful poetic phrase. And he talks about how great works of literature in particular, but art in general, they expand the space of the talkaboutable. That when you read a good book, it's an invitation to talk about the things that it raises, and you kind of get a new perspective and a new horizon along which to kind of position ideas and to share them. And so he talks about the work doing that, and I sort of took that idea and went, actually, well, what I've been doing for the last 25 years is building intentional spaces of the talkaboutable, spaces where the work sits in the middle of it. So I keep releasing music into it, whether that was to my street team back in the early noughties when we all had street teams, or putting it on social media, by uploading it to SoundCloud, or now just Bandcamp. But all the time I was putting things out there in order for them to become part of a conversation amongst people who cared about them, rather than throwing them out for Spotify or whatever. It was like, no, I always wanted to release them to somebody, to a group of people who cared. And it's what would traditionally be a fan base, but I always felt good about segmenting that and kind of creating specific spaces for that community to occupy. So it's encoding and decoding within the space of the talkaboutable. Was this kind of, I've got this visual model of it that talks about how that works. So that's a very long-winded first question. If you've got like 4 questions, we're going to be middle of next week by the time we got to that. But yeah, so it's all about the audience. And the reason I started doing a PhD in the first place was because I wanted to make better music. Like I was like, this isn't, as an academic exercise, it's no fun unless I'm a better musician at the end of it. And I'm categorically a better musician than I was, because I'm so much more aware of how much the audience gives to the process. And I'm super, super aware of what happens when people deny that. So when you get, my sort of bête noire is Rick Rubin and the audience comes last bullshit. He goes on about how you should be protecting your creative thought, what he's saying is not dumbing it down to the audience. But what he's ignoring is that within this broad concept of audience, there are people who are informed, caring, wise, and willing to be vulnerable in sharing what music means to them. And if he's talking about, people he's producing like the Chili Peppers or whatever, there's no reason they should be listening to their audience. I understand what he's saying there. But this idea that the audience are just a bunch of rubes who give you money to make music and you're the genius at the back of it, it's just nonsense. It just doesn't work. Like it's not a healthy way to think about the creative process, because I'm not that person. I'm somebody who is channeling the collective experience of this community and what they're willing to share with me, and I'm presenting it with gratitude back to them as a soundtrack to that community. And that's an extraordinary, extraordinary gift to me, and it's one that I want to give to them, and I hope it's a meaningful gift back to them, and from what they say, it is. But that process of actually kind of seeing that and realizing that it doesn't scale, that at Rick Rubin's scale, if you are some nutbag with a giant beard who produces million-selling records without doing anything, then that doesn't make sense. There is no 300-400 people that are going to help you to kind of understand what your work is, because you're thinking in terms of it having to sell millions or have hundreds of millions of listeners on Spotify. And I don't want that. That was the thing. Remember when somebody said to me, that I needed 200,000 unique listeners on Spotify or whatever to make X amount of money. I was like, I don't want 200,000 people listening to me like that. I don't want the pressure that would come with that. I genuinely would not want to be that broadly listened to, because those people bring with them a set of expectations about what it is that you should be doing. And what's amazing about my subscriber community, I'm interested to kind of throw this back to you and for you to kind of reflect on your audience, because obviously this is your podcast, but no one's ever told me, nobody in that community has ever told me what to do. Randos tell me what to do all the time. You know what you should be doing? You should do a record with a drummer. You know what you should do? You should do an ambient record. You know what you should do? Like all the time. And I've had it for 25 years. Not one person in the subscriber community has ever said that. They've told me what they think about the music. Some of them have told me that they don't get certain bits of it. When I started playing this thing, And I started playing. Oh, there we are. Yeah. Like in 2015, I'd been playing solo for 15 years before I added in percussion. And I started playing that, and a bunch of them like, whoa, what's that? That doesn't belong here.
Judas.
Yeah, exactly. It was a proper Bob Dylan moment. But they didn't say don't do it. They said, can you explain to us why you're doing that? Or can you explain to me? Nobody was speaking on behalf of anybody else. It was like I had a couple of people who bought my first album who were then like, we've been here for 15 years. What's going on? And they went back to it time and time again and went, okay, I kind of get it. I get what you're doing now. I understand it. Because rather than just dismissing it or gleefully going and sharing on a forum that they think I've made a rubbish record, they came back to me and said, can you explain how and why this works? And I was like, God, that's an amazing gift.
Yeah.
Like if you see the discourse around people who make progressively worse records, Metallica discourse is that they haven't done anything worth listening to for 30 years. And yet people still gleefully will kind of listen to their new album in the hope that it's even worse. Like nobody expects a Metallica album to be any good. It's like, what a horrible position to be in.
Yeah.
What would be much better is if somebody said, I don't really get what you're doing. Can you talk to me about it? And it wasn't a grand gesture that required me to kind of, I didn't have to kind of sell it because the record label wanted X amount of sales. I could just say, this is where my head's going. And then they could come back and and it's a conversation rather than a bunch of like public declarations of anything. So having that level of nuance and care, the people who actually care about what you're doing and what you're saying is, it's astonishing. I mean, tell me about your relationship with your audience.
I mean, your approach resonates so much. And, just thinking back to when I first came across you, and I'm not sure, and it might have been Greenbelt related, but then it was certainly online, coming across your blog. And then I can't remember whether I was involved in a forum or just seeing the interactions that went on Twitter. And I remember Rich Huxley from Hope and Social was very involved in that. And
yesterday was the 16th anniversary of me meeting Rich.
Oh, was it? Oh, there you go. But yeah, I just remember feeling so inspired by this other way of thinking about your relationship with the audience. And, I was looking this morning after we sort of mentioned Rick Rubin when we met last week, at, what that idea of the audience comes last actually means. Like, what is he saying? What's the context of that? And he was talking about, your audience they demand something and they don't know, or what they want is the best of you. But like, if you give them what they want, that won't be the best of you. And it just struck me as it's a transactional approach to music making. And it's almost a binary. And I listened to the Creative Act a little while ago, and there's something about it that is meditatively soothing, but it's very ideologically like it's like, oh yeah, this is nice. It's a bit like self-help where you think, oh, it's just nice.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel real or meaningful in the sense of, but how do artists who have an artist heart and like they want to connect with an audience, how do you kind of harness that, and what do you do with that? And for me personally, like, that has always been quite a dialectical thing rather than a binary thing. It's I put something out, and as you say, like, someone will say something, oh, that sounds like this band. Well, I've never heard that band before. Maybe there's like an indirect influence there, and I'll go and listen to that and be like, oh yeah, wow. And then that sort of spirals to something else, and that conversational back and forth that might be conversational in language terms, it might be words, but it might just be an almost a below the surface response,
absolutely,
like call and response kind of thing going on. And the idea of saying the audience comes last or the audience comes first, I think is just a completely different paradigm to the one that I want to be operating in, because it says ultimately you're creating to release a product to that to that audience.
And I think I think the transactionality of it is absolutely essential. I'm really glad you used that word, because it's like, is the transaction you for them or them for you? Like which around it's like, well, it's neither. It's a relationship. It's a community. It's a sharing space, and it's a space where the collective wisdom of the group. This is why Eno's thing of Scenius is really key. One of the other models that I talk about in the PhD is the idea of a community of practice. And a community of practice is normally a bunch of people doing the same thing. So you get a group of potters together who talk about what they do, and they all learn together. A group of bass players who all kind of sit around and talk about bass playing. And I guess the bottom line, that original email list was a community of practice in that sense, in that we were all practitioners. But like, I expanded that to go, well, can you have a community of practice where only one of you is the key practitioner in that community? I mean, there's a bunch of bass players, obviously, and there's a bunch of amazing musicians in my subscriber community. There are people in there whose work I absolutely love. I just bought an album yesterday by one of the guys who's been listening to me since my first album, but makes a beautiful generative ambient music of his own, and I just bought his record. So I'm not the only creator in there, but within that particular manifestation of that community, I'm the central one. And so, can you have that? Can like, one of the key components of a community of practice is that there's a practice that people are improving at, and it's like, is the practice of being an audience member actually something you can get better at? Can you become a better listener? Can you become a better informed about the work in order to gain more from it? And you think, well, yeah, because it's like, in that sense, it's almost like wine tasting, or like some other thing where you just become a connoisseur of it. And so my audience, and when they come back to me and say, oh, how did you make that sound? Like, it's kind of interesting, because rather than it just being a novelty driven thing like it is on Instagram, we're like, wow, I've never heard a bass make that noise. They're like, no, I'm really interested in whether or not is that a synth? Is that processing? How does that work? And how are you getting that shifting texture? Like there's a lot of process driven stuff that enables them to understand the liveness of it, because obviously everything that I do is live, single take, unedited, which again, like, invites them into a different kind of relationship with it. And so I want it to work, so that I don't want it to be a gimmick. I don't want it to sound like a gear test, because it, and I think you probably grew up the same thing, that my when I first started, as well as having this community space, the ultimate like media validation was radio. Being on the radio was great, because you didn't have to look clever. You didn't explain it. You weren't going, look at me play bass on its own. It was like, it needed to sit in a playlist alongside a bunch of other stuff, and it needed to work just as music. And that felt like the ultimate validation. So when Late Junction started playing my stuff on Radio 3, when Fiona Talkington and Verity Sharp both started playing bits of it, I was like, this is brilliant, because they don't care. They don't know. I mean, they might have read the sleeve notes. They might know that it's live, but it's not on the radio because it's a clever thing for a bass player to do on his own. It's on the radio because it sits in between the first tune of mine that was ever played on Radio 3. Before it was PJ Harvey, and after it was Edgar Mayer, the American solo double bass player. And I was like, yeah, that's where I want to be. That sounds great. Yeah. And I think that, again, that's less of a thing now. Playlisting has become algorithmically driven. It's become transactional in that way. But back then, BBC felt like a different thing, because they didn't feel like they had that. It didn't feel like it was. You certainly wasn't something you could buy. It wasn't something you could gerrymander in some kind of way. You couldn't kind of go, great, well, let's make it so that it only works for people like me. The presenter just had to love it, or the producer had to love it, and that felt like a really, really amazing experience. And so, but within my community, within the subscriber community, there are people who are very interested in process because it informs their listening, not because that's the end game. Yeah. And I kind of love that. I love that integration of that it becomes additive rather than, you talked about the sort of dialectical thing, and dialectics are really interesting because you've got these two polar opposites that are held in tension, and that's where the thing sits, is in between these two polar opposites. But there are a lot of things where it all feels a bit zero sum, and it's like, well, if they like that, then they can't like that as much. If they're interested in the gear, then that's going to take away from the enjoyment of it. And the community space allows those things to be additive, so that it's actually the sum is greater than both. So it's like, I love this music, and now that I understand how it's done, I can picture him playing it.
Yeah.
And that's that's a great thing as well, like, and so I get to chat about how, about why, about the journey through it, about what the influences are in it. All of these kind of things that if I was relying on external media to do this, or even so if I was relying on external media, then no magazine is going to interview me more than once every 18 months. So that wasn't going to work. And magazines don't really exist anymore anyway. So that doesn't help. If I was relying on social media, I would have to keep being exciting enough that the algorithm would show it to people. I couldn't just talk about stuff that I cared about. We've felt that shift as bloggers, as people who used to write on our own website all the time, where you could write what you want and expect an audience to, a core audience to care about it. And as soon as that went away and everything was Facebook was the hub of everything, or Twitter was the hub of everything, it's like, well, now that those are algorithmically sorted, you need to have that wow thing, that it's back to like writing a press release and requiring a plugger. Only this time your press release is the requirements of the algorithm. You need to hit that. You need something sensational to actually trigger it so people see it.
Yeah.
And it's like there's a banality to that. There's a real bored. It's really boring when everybody's trying to be sensational all the time, because there's no nuance left. So how do we create nuanced spaces for those of us who are storytellers, rather than carnies? Like I feel like I'm stood outside a sideshow going, roll up, roll up, roll up, come and see the solo bass monkey. It's like, no, that's not what I want to do. I want to soundtrack people's lives. And the subscription made that possible, and the PhD is all about that journey to that.
Yeah, that sort of speaks to what you're saying about setting out to improve, to become a better bass player as a result of doing your PhD, and actually that whole approach to the relational audience actually really feeds that, compared with what we might see now, which is perception management. And so it's not necessarily in your interest.
You've really thought about this stuff, haven't you? This is
I think about it all a lot, yeah. But it's because it's like what the current kind of climate, or the way that we approach things, encourages developing a perception, making people believe that something is true, whether or not it actually is. And I don't know, have you come across Wings of Pegasus on YouTube? He does.
Yes, yeah.
I really value a lot of what he does, which is to just shine a light on where people are like presenting things or selling you things, hoping that you believe they are real. But actually, there's all sorts of, whether it's pitch correction, autotune, processing that's gone on that means that it can't be what it's being sold as. And so I think he does a very helpful public service in that respect. But yeah, it just seems like there's incentives to not be honest, and there's increasingly incentives to not to even value your own journey with your art.
And to be honest becomes an act of resistance, which I mean, in some sense it always was, so we get, there's this one side of the narrative, which is record companies used to be experimental spaces. You wouldn't get a Joni Mitchell now, you wouldn't get a Frank Zappa now, you wouldn't get whatever. And the problem with those is that very often those people are themselves unicorns. Like there's only one Frank Zappa. If there were 10,000 Frank Zappas, that would be a business choice. That would be a model that we could follow. But there's one. So that's not helpful. Joni was an exquisitely beautiful folk singer when she started. Like wore her influences really firmly on her sleeve. She was very influenced by Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross, and and kind of the prevailing folk scene. 8 albums in, she made Hejira. But that's after she'd made Clouds and Ladies of the Canyon and a bunch of records that are beautiful. I mean, there's nothing not extraordinary about them, but they're also not like revolutionary and weird. They're just great. So there is this narrative that record labels would throw money at experimental work, and they did. And there was certainly a case for the scale at which those things would happen, but there were also hard walls on the size of audience that you could access if you weren't on a label, but if you weren't on a major. And so having this kind of that additional space to do so, like your man doing, having a YouTube channel that probably makes him money talking about pitch correction. Like previously he'd have had to get a book deal, and would have had to come up with a way of representing all of that material on paper without all the multimedia component to it. So there's a side to it that's that. There's a side to it that is, you know, if you make great game music, or if you remix other people's music, there's channels for that, which is a kind of grey economy, because you're making some of the money and they're making some of the money, and YouTube is trying to work out who gets what, and it's all micropayments. But there are now avenues for those kinds of creative output. But back in the day when it was like, yeah, but you know, you can't get a record deal now, and you go, well, yeah, but how many people had record deals? Like, how many people actually got signed to a label? And when the step up from an indie to a major would sometimes mean like a 50-fold increase in your sales. One of the maddest statistics about this is I think about the American hardcore scene in the 80s, the punk scene, and how like certainly one of the top 2 or 3 most significant records to come out of that scene was Double Nickels on the Dime by the Minutemen, which I think sold 5,000 copies in its first pressing. And right up until it was on streaming and whatnot, it sold like 30,000 copies. Like, you could change the world with a 30,000 selling album. I once had a conversation with John Penny from Ned's Atomic Dustbin. We were teaching at the same college. And when they got signed to a major and went to the States, they had a couple of hits as an indie, went to the States on a major. And I think he said, I'd have to check these figures, but I think he said that they sold 500,000 copies of their first album with the late major, and that was considered a flop and they were dropped. You're like, change the world with 30,000 copies, sell 500,000 copies and be considered a failure. Like the economy of scale was so nuts. And then if you were talking about people self-releasing, you were selling tapes, you know, on a table at a gig, and that was it. You were making your own cassettes at home. So there's been this technological revolution where I talked about this this is probably one of the early things you would have read of mine, was I talked about the difference between transformative and incremental change. And incremental change is when we've got more or less of a thing that already exists. You know, we kind of go, oh, great, I can sell more CDs because I can sell them online. That's a CD sales shopping thing. Like, that's still a scarce economy where I make product, but I now have a new shop window for that product. It's at home, but instead of someone sending me a piece of paper and a check, which is my first album, I've still got a box full of all the order forms for my first album because it's before online sales. That's how old I am. But then, so suddenly you could order it and you could receive the money via PayPal or whatever, and suddenly that was all digitized. That's an incremental change. Digitizing music and it being available at the click of a button, either for sale or for free download, is not an incremental change. So when we start to say it's a transformative change, it changes the entire, because we've jumped from a scarce economy where I have to make stuff in order to sell it, and somebody taking that away is, in a very real sense, theft, because those are products that I now can't sell. So I've actually lost money from doing that, to one where I have this potential to make money, but I also have potential to gain listeners. The move from product pricing, where I paid for a download, to experience pricing, where I paid for listening to it, those two things are not comparable. And charts all over the world have tried to mean it, go, oh, well, 300 listens is a download, or 1,000 listens is that, whatever it is. Like, it's nonsense, because how do we know? If I think about, you know, there is, according to Last FM, there is no song that I've ever listened to 300 times. We think that we listen to our favorite music 1,000 times, but if you've got eclectic taste, you probably haven't. If you listen to something 50 times, it feels like it's your favorite ever music. Like that's an awful lot of listening.
That would be a lot of times. Yeah.
And yet that on Spotify, that would be what, 8p, 10p, whatever it is. I don't know what the escalator is these days. But you're talking about a tiny, tiny amount of money for something that has changed your life. So we can't, when we start thinking about scales of value and economies of scale that include the value to us, the problem with sort of unit value of making records, or people talking about how expensive it is to make a record, it's like, well, that's not even a thing anymore, because even back in the day, some of our favorite records were made in a day and some of them were made in 8 years. If your favorite album is Kind of Blue, it was made in literally a day. But if your favorite album is Hysteria by Def Leppard, you've got bizarre taste. But it was 6 years or 7 years of of them in a very expensive studio tracking this thing over that amount of time. Like so, the cost of production has never been a metric of value. And I was, the way I used to put it was that great music is priceless and bad music is worthless. Like that's how we treat it. And so it doesn't really matter how we receive it. And that's the thing with music, is that if I close my eyes, it doesn't matter whether it's on vinyl or Spotify. I'm not seeing the point of delivery. With a book or a Kindle, those things are tangible. They're tactile, but music isn't. When people talk about the importance of physical media for music, it's like, well, it's just a delivery system. The music itself is still, as Basquiat described it, it's how we decorate time. That art is how we decorate space, and music is how we decorate time. And so the physical product exists in space, not in time. So music has this. That's one of my favorite quotes. I mean, I'm a big Basquiat fan anyway, but that particular quote is such a glorious way of thinking about what music is. I'm not a big fan of ontologies at all, but like as a metaphor for thinking about the temporal relationship that we have with music. That music exists as either memory or expectation. Daniel Kahneman, the great neuroscientist who died a couple of years ago, used to talk about how what we perceive as now is approximately 1 second before and 1 second after a kind of infinite dot. So when we're in music, that's what we experience as now, and everything is what we remember of the piece that we've just been listening to, or what we're anticipating for the rest of it. It's not about the vinyl or the MP3 player or the iPod versus streaming. It's like, it's all delivery mechanism. I mean, it's hugely important to us as creators, because it's like, how many people do I need to engage, and how much does it cost me to engage those people in order for me to make a living from this?
Yeah, it's essentially that question of how can I keep doing this is the core thing. Like, yeah.
Exactly. It's like, and that's the thing. And when you and I, neither of us have a kind of particular concern for becoming celebrities, becoming famous, but we both have a very strong concern for sustainability. And it's exactly that question. Like, I want to keep doing this. I want to keep doing this. I'm going to keep doing this in a way that is meaningful to me, where I'm not trying to meet a market because that's how I pay my bills. Like, because if I was going to do that, I'd just join a wedding band, because then I just get to play music that I already know is amazing. Like covers band. Like I really love playing in a good covers band. I don't see that as a downside to being a musician at all. Because they're all songs that I love. I have a band with I teach at BIM in Birmingham, and we have a staff band that does functions. So, between us, we've played with a ridiculous array of musicians. Like, it's a really, really high functioning function band. But like, the tunes that we do are amazing. Like, there's nothing in the set that I don't love. Like, why would that be a bad thing? Why would that feel like selling out? Like, playing great music and playing it with people who are good at it and playing it because you care about it is fantastic. And I'd much rather do that than be trying to corrupt the thing that is actually me talking to the world, to try and make it meet what Instagram or YouTube or Facebook needs from me in order to go viral and therefore make some money off the ad revenue that generates.
It's almost like that's something of a tragedy, where you're compromising or funneling what you create through the dictates of the algorithm or of whatever those demands are in that external delivery space. And that's not just affecting how you contain what you create, but it's affecting what you create and why. And that feels like a bigger tragedy. Yeah.
Well, it's dystopian. I mean, it's beyond, it's because it turns the creative process into like a fast show sketch where everything's like, wow, amazing, wow, genius. Like, and I have students who will tell me that somebody is their favorite bass player. And when I dig a little, like university students, and when I dig a little deeper, the only connection they have with them is watching them on Instagram. I'm like, so there's nothing about what that person did that made you want to go and dig out a record. You don't even have it bookmarked on a free Spotify account. You literally only watched 20 seconds at a time of them playing really clever stuff. It's like, so they're literally there because it's a dopamine hit. You haven't learned any of their stuff? Nope. You haven't, there's none of their techniques that you've experimented with? Nope. So this person that you claim as your favorite is somebody you've watched in 20-second chunks, delivered by an algorithm, not by you going and looking for it. And it has had zero material impact on you as a musician, despite the fact that they're one of your peers. I'm like, wow, that's really odd. And what's normally the case is that when you ask them what they listen to, it's very often music from 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Interesting.
So they have this obsession with stuff that is really, like, gives them the dopamine rush of something amazing on YouTube or on Instagram. But they're actually listening to Black Sabbath and AC/DC and Fleetwood Mac and Joni and James Taylor. And, this is kind of this weird thing of like 18-year-olds, but Talking Heads are still huge with kids. Like it's amazing. It's bizarre to me that somebody can watch, I don't know, Henrik Linder play bass and not want to go out and get a Dirty Loops record. Or Moto Fukushima, who plays in a band called something Falling Waters or something like that. I think he's Japanese bass player. Like breathtakingly beautiful music. And the idea that you would watch 20 seconds of him and not go, oh my God, I need to hear this in context. Where was the death of context? At what point
that context
did we
was
lose
the
that?
exact word that I was just thinking as you were sort of describing that, saying who your favorite bassist is. It's plucked from context. Yeah, what's the context of where they play? How do they sound within that? And to flip it to them, like, how does that feel to be one of those musicians who nobody actually has any meaningful engagement with other than the things that you do to show off and go viral or whatever?
I mean, I think what there is a will towards being ever increasingly shrill with how you get that attention, because it wears off. Like there's a time where people, oh yeah, I've seen you do that 1,000 times. I want to hear something different. And so some of them become more and more sensationalist. Some of them, I mean, I've had friends and acquaintances who in their pursuit to become successful YouTubers have gone off the deep end and kind of ended up in sort of some quite dark political spaces as a result, which is kind of weird. But for some of the musicians, it must be a source of frustration because they are making amazing music. I mean, Henrik Linder is a perfect example of this. That Dirty Loops started out as a kind of, they got famous off the back of uploading these sort of like Chick Corea-ish fusion covers of Justin Bieber and Britney Spears songs and whatnot. And it was just pre-algorithm. So they were just at the point when people could share YouTube links on Facebook and not have them throttled. So that was exactly, they described this on a video with, who's that ridiculous YouTube guy who just talks rubbish? Rick Beato. They described this on a video with Beato where, and Rick's like take on it is like, he's just talking absolute balls. And Henrik very gently says, no, this is what happened. We just caught the tail end of, and he was like, you're the first person to do that. It's like, no, we weren't. We just got the tail. Can you just pause a minute? This is where we got to. And I have an awful lot of time for Henrik, but also for Dirty Loops, because they're just a fusion pop band and like a really good one. And it's like, they got famous for doing a slightly gimmicky thing, but they're extraordinary musicians. I mean, breathtakingly great musicians. And it's not a gimmick. It's not there's a reason why he's the one who's going off and doing a lot of these kind of super collab things with other kind of, members of Snarky Puppy or Wolfpack or whatever, because he's that good.
But this is literally before people put stuff on YouTube. And
I guess.
How much of your success you think comes from social media?
Like almost all of it. Yeah, that's been the biggest factor. Like especially the YouTube videos. That's where we gained all the following. That's like what shared everything and like where we grew as a band. So yeah, it's a lot.
I see you guys, and then Jacob Collier later on became.
I think Snarky Puppy
Puppy as well. Yeah. Lingus has a 50 million views.
Wolfpack also.
Wolfpack, exactly.
Yeah. But it must be weird to know that you need to keep wowing people in order for them to listen. And my big worry with that is not for people who enjoy being wowed, because those have always existed. P-Funk as an entire movement was built on this celebration of the sort of gesturally ridiculous, grandiose Afrofuturist vision for George Clinton's vision of this kind of Afrofuturist thing was just amazing. Like, and Bootsy Collins in star-shaped specs playing one chord, like that's that would have been the perfect Instagram photo of its time, and it's amazing, and nothing ever needed to change about that. But what did we do about Talk Talk or the Blue Nile, or people who at the early part of their career would not have dreamt of talking about it in those kind of ways? Where do we hear music by shy people? But yeah, I feel like there are certain things that we've missed in foregrounding the sensational that were deeply meaningful to us as listeners. That as much as I enjoyed, exciting, extravagant, shredding music with pyro going off and smoke machines and whatnot, I also enjoyed sitting down and listening to somebody playing gentle songs on acoustic guitar. And I think that, the algorithm does occasionally throw those kind of things up. There are viral hits that are somebody playing very gently, and you go, that's great, but what's the cascade down from that? Because if there's a cutoff point where YouTube decides that you should have an audience, it's like, wait a minute, I didn't sign to YouTube as a label. I did not hire YouTube as a publicist. How do I get past that without having to change the work? Yeah. And that for me is the big worry, because you lose the context of a body of work, the context of an album, the context of a song within which that guitar solo that you've just seen on YouTube exists. It's kind of a difficult one to plow through, because there are definitely affordances within the modern media landscape for kinds of practice that were unimaginable before, and that's unequivocally good. But there are also mechanisms of control within that can be changed at the whim of somebody's marketing or budgeting spreadsheet, that mean that entire sectors of the creative economy suddenly have no visibility because they no longer meet the requirements. And that's really worrying. Yeah, that's really troubling.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there feels like a stuckness to that. There's a stagnation.
I think there's an interesting thing here about the fact that we are not, that a lot of these are unintended consequences, but they're also unnamed consequences. So if somebody is inspired by people who make 20-second videos, and they want to go and make 20-second videos, that's what inspires them to do, there's a process to that makes perfect sense. That you go, great, I'm inspired. This is my perception of what music should be is 20 seconds long. In the same way that somebody who heard Napalm Death in 1988 might be inspired to make 12-second long grindcore tunes and make loads of them. And it's like, oh, great, you don't have to be Pink Floyd for your music to be meaningful. You can join a grindcore band and make songs that are a fraction of a minute long, and that's great. And if that's what if you're somebody who watches Charles Bertode videos, again, I'm all my references to bass players, obviously, and the fact that everything that he does is a minute and a half long means that that's how you perceive the length of the music should be. I don't think there's an inherent value in long music. I as a 52-year-old bloke listen to Charles Bertode and go, God, I'd love to hear the 9-minute version of this, because I'm preconditioned, culturally preconditioned to enjoy that kind of epic exploration of ideas. I like hearing things unfold in much more subtle ways, but it's not inherently better. The problem comes when you've got a bunch of kids who are listening to music from the past that is what they're actually soundtracking their lives with. They are scrolling, and there's this kind of the dopamine hit of all these little clips of video, but there's no point at which they go, I wonder if that person makes a record. And there's no link to it. There's no sense that should be a journey. But it also means that they're making music based on a bunch of music that made all of its money 40 or 50 years ago. Like that they are not connecting the idea that because even their favorite musicians are people that they're giving they're not investing in any way. They're often not going to see them live. Sometimes they are. I mean, some of these people get to tour, and Dirty Loops would be a perfect example of a band that have a very successful touring career. Snarky Puppy did well. I mean, apparently when Wolfpack played Brixton Academy, everybody sang along to the bass solo in Deantown. Like the audience knew the bass solo, which is like wild. I mean, it's not a piece of music I'm particularly interested in, but maximum respect to them for engaging a community on that scale, that people actually want to sing a bass solo back at them, because I can't imagine anybody else who's done that other than maybe Rush. Like that's extraordinary. So it's not that there isn't music that is meaningful to people being made within those scenes, and my own taste is the last thing that I want to impose on those kind of considerations. I don't want to come to it and go, I, as a 52-year-old white dude from London living in Birmingham, should have some kind of say over what is considered aesthetically pleasing. Yeah. My issue is when somebody's process, when the outcome that they desire, that they themselves vocalize, is not supported by the process through which they're going. And particularly when their public presentation about music leads their own audience and potential audience away from what it is that they're doing. Mm. So I have an awful lot of friends who spend all of their time online talking about old music, particularly aging jazzers, will go on and on and on about how this Coltrane record or that Miles record or this Bill Evans record or whatever. And then they put out a record and you go, why do you expect anybody to listen to that? Because you've been telling them on a daily basis for the last 2 years, in between your last record and this one, that the only decent music happened at least 40 years ago. You have not highlighted any new music that you care about. Why do you expect an audience to see your record and your record alone within the continuum of what you've just been describing? Because it doesn't sit in that continuum. It sits within a world of vibrant new music with other people making music about the world now that draws on some of that tradition. You know, it's like if you're thinking about modern jazz and kind of the British jazz scene, there's a lot that is quite traditional, and a lot of people are still recording all acoustic projects. You know, the lineup still might be sax, piano, bass, drums. But the music itself is informed by the fact that you know, they've been listening to all this other stuff. And so when you try and go, okay, here's Coltrane matters, Miles matters, Bill Evans matters, even like Keith Jarrett matters, and then you go, and here's my record. There's no logical reason why anybody would do that. Ditto if you bang on about Stevie Wonder all the time, or 80s pop and go, oh, nobody writes like that anymore. Here's my new album.
Yeah,
you're part of that nobody.
Yeah.
It's like you've just told your audience that nothing modern matters. And why would you do that? So I've spent the last 20 years of my online life talking about other people's music, getting invested in discovery, in the processes of discovery, so that I can demonstrate what it is to be supportive of the music that I care about. I tend to try and avoid the language of fandom. It's just a predilection of mine that I find that the language of fandom just jars with me a little, but not. Again, I don't see it as a moral or ethical decision. It's just I find there are other words that are better. But yeah, that being a good listener, being a supportive patron of the arts is something that really matters to me, and I want to be that. I don't just want to be at the receiving end of that. I want to be part of a circulation system where I'm giving not only money by buying people's records on Bandcamp or at gigs, but I'm giving attention, and I'm using the platform I have to go, check this out, have a look at this, have a look at this. And so whenever I have a conversation with somebody and they go, oh yeah, I heard that because you shared it. I discovered them. We talked about Hope and Social right at the start. The number of people I know who discovered Hope and Social because I talked about them.
Yeah.
I had a friend of mine, a singer-songwriter friend of mine who sadly died earlier this year, called Emily Baker, a complete genius. And the number of messages I got when I talked about the fact that she died and how much I missed her and how much, because she was an academic as well, she was supporting me through the PhD. But I talked about it, and so many people said, I heard Emily's music because of you.
I heard Emily's music because of you. Yeah.
And there we go. You see that? I mean, and that is like, why would you not see that as absolutely primary to your purpose on earth? And there was something in that grasping sensationalist social media thing where sharing other people's music is not prioritized by the algorithm, where whenever I share other people's music, particularly new music, in my Instagram stories, half as many people will see it as if I share something political or something funny. Like if I just go, oh, here's a record by a friend of mine, like the view count is tiny. The like count is normally reasonable. That people will, because I have an audience who look to me for recommendations.
When they see that, they appreciate it.
Yeah.
They just don't see it. Yeah.
But so many just don't get to see it because Instagram says no. What we want you to do is we want you to rant about what's happening in the world or just be funny, and it's like that's a real problem. Like we don't. So instead, what most people do, because they're not seeing it as part of their. I mean, obviously, I have a very strong sense of mission within all of this. There's a very strong sense of purpose. Most artists don't think like that, and it's and that's not a failing. That's just the way we are. It's relax into that space where all they do is talk about themselves, and old music because that builds an audience. If I post a video, if I posted Stevie Wonder's Signed, Sealed, Delivered in my stories today and said, "This is one of my favorite bass lines of all time," tons and tons of likes, 700 views, it's going to go off the. But if I posted, some new band that I'd seen at Greenbelt and went, "I love this. I saw these guys play. Nobody's heard of them, but they're amazing." 70 people would see it. 6 people would like it. But if one person went and bought it, that's a bigger impact than the Stevie Wonder one would have. But it's it's like and part of that is because the investment required from the viewer to go, right, I'm going to click on that link, I'm going to go there, I'm going to see it, I'm going to listen through the album, and I'm going to decide to buy it. That's huge. Whereas seeing 10 seconds of Stevie Wonder playing Signed, Sealed, Delivered, hearing a little bit of Nathan Watts' bass line and going, "Oh God, I love that," and then clicking away from it.
And nobody's lost something that you already are familiar with.
Yeah. And which sits with that maxim, the sort of the music economy maxim, which is it's always easier to resell new versions of things that people already like than it is to get them into new music.
Yeah. You just really brought that quote back to my mind of like, music is how we decorate time, and how, there's obviously that use of music that has been in the archives and gone before, and then just using that to decorate your time. But there's also, I think, something so much, and I think you really nailed it, sort of saying, this isn't just trying to project my own biases or like taste in music on other things and saying like, you should like what I like. It's actually noticing these are the things that we are almost collectively saying we want more of, or we want to invest more time into, but these are the things we're doing that almost actively go against that and take us away from those things. And that whole thing of music is how we decorate time, how that can be an engagement with the music that is alive around us and being played and created, and come to that message that you received to say like, I'm only listening to your music after my dad has died, and to have that engagement, then to receive a message back from you, and that you might do that with somebody like, all you can listen to is Stevie Wonder. You're never going to have an engagement with Stevie Wonder. And so it just brings it to a much more alive, present place, and that decoration of time is not just the music itself, but it's the experience of, I don't know, music has more than just the sound of it. Like, So
I think the biggest challenge that people making new music face is the collective uninterrogated role that nostalgia plays in our media consumption. Because when somebody says to me, and an awful lot of people my age will say, nobody's writing songs like they used to. All songs now are really boring. They've all got the same 4 chords, and nobody's writing big tunes anymore. And if you listen to Duran Duran or Nick Kershaw or whoever it was, they wrote these amazing melodies. And the thing is that there are a lot of people still making music like that. There are some amazing, very 80s sounding bands who are writing those kind of tunes. And even those bands themselves are still making music like that. But what people are ignoring in that is that when you hear Wouldn't It Be Good or Rio or West End Girls or whatever it is that we're listening to, what you've got is the nostalgic side of that, the part of it that reminds you of your childhood, that makes you feel a little bit less like you're about to die, a little bit less like your life is drifting away, because you're thinking about, you're back in that moment of the summer that you heard that record for the first time, the disco the school disco where you first heard it, the simplicity or perceived simplicity of being, in your teens in the 80s, or indeed the difficulty of being in your teens in the 80s, and kind of this sort of, the fact that the various emotional engagements that we can have with the soundtrack of our younger years. Sometimes it's very complex. Sometimes it's not just idyllic.
Yeah, and sometimes it's the music that helped you through that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Got you out of it.
Yeah, and it's like so, and you go, well, it's not. That's fundamentally not about melodic writing. that's fundamentally not about complexity or the instruments that were played, or, you know, people going about real music. Oh, it was real music back then. You go, what was real music? The entire first Pet Shop Boys album was made on a Roland MC500. Like, that's a 16-step sequencer that did everything. Now, they squeezed an awful lot out of that, and it was that plus a Fairlight and an emulator. But you could run exactly the same software on an iPhone now, and the music that is made like that is not going to engage you the same way the Pet Shop Boys did, because that was what you heard in your teens. And the thing is, when we're in our teens and we're trying to build an identity for ourselves, particularly my generation and yours, I'm guessing, to a greater degree, because you're not 12. But we grew up at a time when music occupied an artificially massive role in culture, and it was largely to do with the distribution technology. That records were easier to press, easier to make the things that they played on. The things they played on were mobile. The invention of the Walkman changed everything, because you could have your own private soundtrack. Nobody did that with film for a very, very long time. Effectively, it was the development of laptops that got to the point where we would actually watch films on our own on things. I mean, you know, people made portable DVD players eventually, but they were never anywhere near the same level as films with downloadable content or streamable content. So that's very, very late on. You could buy singles and ship singles around the world very cheaply from the 1940s onwards. So music was the most portable method of culture. So it occupied this artificially massive role, because it was also one that could be the economic affordances of that particular model were ones that could be controlled and manipulated and driven in certain kinds of ways. And youth culture was built around it. And that's just not the case now. The youth culture is built around gaming and social media and film and TV. We're in a golden age of TV. God, the TV that I grew up with was absolute rubbish compared to what's available now. Sitcoms were racist and misogynistic routinely. You know, there were very few like normal TV shows that shaped the way I saw the world. Colin, the gay doctor on EastEnders, was like a massive storyline back then. Like, that was a big deal in the mid-80s. And it's like, and you know, it's like, you think how far would I have to go to find positive gay characters on Netflix? Like, they're going to be there in my recommendations. Like, it's not like the world is very different now, and TV can play that role that it didn't back then. I needed to go to music for that kind of thing. There was no independent TV at all. I wasn't finding, you know, independent film back then was an incredibly niche thing. You had to absolutely love filmmaking to go and do that. And I'm now discovering things, you know, independent films, black filmmakers from the 60s and 70s that were making these extraordinary prophetic and prescient movies that I didn't know about at the time. I didn't get to see those. You know, nobody was saying to me, hey, you should be checking out indie cinema, go and try this. It wasn't part of my world, but records were, and indie records were, and records that sold minute numbers of copies would be available in my town. So there were people who acted as almost like a kind of a bardic role within a town by writing songs about that town. You know, even big bands like Madness, all of their record sales were in London, whereas Deacon Blue, all their record sales were in Scotland. There was a tribalism to who people felt they belonged, and so we had a national chart. But those national charts were such that you could be massive in Glasgow and unlistened to in London, and you would still end up in the charts. Yeah, and that you know, the internet has kind of, in some good ways, has cut through that, but in some other ways has kind of universalized that language to the point where that kind of localization is much harder to find. So we have this completely different media landscape, and so nostalgia, the uninterrogated nature of nostalgia, because I love listening to music from my childhood. I absolutely adore listening to Talking Heads and Chic, and, you know, going back to old Joni Mitchell records and Alison Weir records, and, you know, there's this The Cure. Like, there were certain things that still stand up, and there are certain things that are objectively rubbish that I still enjoy listening to because they make me feel good. I'm never not going to smile at I Think We're Alone Now by Tiffany. That's always going to make me super happy, because it's a piece of pop genius despite the nonsensicalness of it. Like, but I've interrogated it. I've understood its role and its limitations in giving me the tools to understand the world as I see it now. And that's the thing that I'm trying to do. And that's what I got to with my audience during COVID. And then when I had the cancer diagnosis in July 2022, I came out of hospital 3 weeks later. The first thing I did was pick up my bass and film a video for my subscribers. Not because I felt like I'd been robbing them of content. Like, that wasn't the thing at all. It was just like, here's a community that understands what I'm going through. Here's a community that's following my story. And here's a community where if I put this on YouTube, people will go, listen to him, he's crap, he can't even play. Because my hands, I'd been cannulaed for 2 weeks and they were like claws. You know, I hadn't touched anything. My joints weren't working. I just picked up a bass. I couldn't pick my fingers, it hurt. So it's this thing of me playing with a pick. And I recorded a piece that I called Filigree and uploaded it for subscribers. And there was this outpouring of response to it. And I carried on through that, soundtracking it, that I was able to record ambient music that reflected how my brain felt at the diverse stages through that publicly I couldn't have released it fast enough to talk about it, but I had this community who wanted to hear it. And so that whole process where it's as far from nostalgic because it's immediate. It's me making it in the morning, my audience hearing it in the evening, and the next morning there being a bunch of response to it. And them talking about it and them saying things like, wow, you sound like you've got way more hope than you think. Like, there is hope in this music. This is the sound of somebody who sees a future for themselves. And it's like, that, to be told that by your listeners in the middle of a cancer diagnosis is an extraordinary gift.
And was that something that you weren't feeling at that time? Was that sort of a...
Well, it was just, I think I was trying to kind of understand how I was feeling. And I went through moments of, I mean, the actual despair lasted about 2 days. I got a secondary diagnosis in the middle of my cancer journey that suggested that it might actually be a lot harder and a lot worse than it ended up being. I was incredibly fortunate, you know, with how things played out in the end. But there were moments when they were recognizing things in it and responding to it, talking about the way that they were able to use the music and even just their enjoyment of it. I was, you know, here's me going, this is my brain on cancer, and them going, God, this is beautiful. You go, great. I'm glad that something beautiful has come out of this. And it's the kind of response that I've just never had on any platform where there's no initial commitment to be there. And that's the thing. Like I would love to be able to just throw all this lot up for free. I would love to be in a position where I could do that. But even if I could afford to do that, even if I didn't, if the subscriber money wasn't a significant contribution to my living and well-being, I wouldn't do it, because there's something really important about committing to things. There's something really important about recognizing what. I remember hearing a talk in, I can't remember if it was at Greenbelt or in a church back in the noughties, about the concept of enoughness. A guy called Dave Tomlinson did this talk about the idea that there was within a particular feast day within the church or something. He was talking about this idea that we need to have limits on our consumption. We need to have an ethical, metaphysical framework for understanding what is enough, because capitalism is constantly telling us that that's not the case. That we need to be, everything needs to be bigger, everything needs to be richer, every audience needs to grow, every record needs to sell more than the last. And when we stop and go, no, that's enough. Yeah. I have enough. I'm doing okay, and I can sit in this space. Well, you know, what the Green Party would call steady state economics. You know, like this idea that growth is not always a good thing. Growth is what caused cancer. So exactly. That's not, yeah, exactly. That's, yeah. You know, and that's the metaphor that everybody uses. And I quite like being able to use that without sounding flippant now, because having had it. But it's true, you know, that there are, when I think about that thing, coming back to where we started, that idea that we both value sustainability in our practice, in our creative lives, in our development as human beings. It's like I don't want my career to develop to the point where it makes me a worse person. I don't want to become an arsehole because I've developed a level of success, or I don't want to have to become an arsehole in order to develop a level of success. I don't want to stop talking about other people's music because an algorithm says, you should be talking about your own music. I don't want to play faster and flashier and do more twiddly stuff and more 30-second videos because that's what tracks on Instagram. when actually what I need to do in order to get my cancer brain around what's going on in my life is play 30 minutes of ambient music. Like carving out a space across 20 years where I could do that. Like that was 22 years of preparation for me to get to that point where I could do that. And it also meant, and I guess this is probably a kind of great sort of denouement of this section of the conversation, is that when I announced online that I had cancer and I said, there's no GoFundMe, I don't have hospital bills because I live in England and we still have a broadly functioning NHS. But what I can't do is I can't teach and I can't gig. The bit of my career that is still running all the way through this is that I sell music. Here's the subscription link. Here's the sales link. And I made something like 15 grand in 3 days.
Wow.
So it meant that my then wife could quit her job. Or, well, not quit her job, cut back to go part-time in order to take care of me because I needed that. And there is no mechanism within social media for that. There was no way that people were going, I'm going to go and watch you on YouTube to do this.
Yeah.
I'm going to listen to your music on Spotify constantly. Great, thanks. That'll be 27p by the end of tomorrow. Yeah. And I'll get it in 6 months' time once the aggregator has taken their fair share. No, this was money in my bank account within 3 days. And it's not begging. It's my job. Like I got the dignity of saying I have a music career that is looking after me in this moment. Now, people's reasons for buying the music, that's much more complex. I'm not naive about that. The mechanism by which I was able to sustain myself was my music career. And that, again, within the framework of the world as it is at the moment, that was an extraordinary thing to get to do. Yeah. That was an extraordinary thing. And it still sits with me, every day. I'm like, God, I managed to get through that. And this was how. That's an amazing thing.
Beautiful testimony to what you built and what you meant to people within that as well, and within that story.
And relatively small number of people. That's the other joy of it, is that I didn't have to become a huge star to do that. And I have friends who are really famous, who when I talk to them are really struggling for how to fund their projects because their fame demands of them a scale that is flipping expensive. So I managed to maintain this all at this scale. I mean, I'm sat in my studio here. This is it. This is where everything is made. It's either here or a live recording. I make music at a human scale for a small group of people who care about it, and I make it sustainably. And I don't need 100,000 listeners. I don't need to play to 400 people a night in order to break even.
Cool, man. Well, I will let you go and prepare for some teaching. And
yes. Great. No, I loved it. Let's do it again.
Absolutely.
You're the perfect person to talk to this about. It's great.
So shines a good deed in a weary world.
Can all be angels in disguise.